preacher from the back room, calling my name and I follow just to find you. I trace the faith to a broken down television and put on the weather. And I've trained myself to give up on the past, cause I've frozen time between hearses and caskets. Lost control when I panicked at the acid test. I wanna get better.
Good evening and welcome to Muscatine Viewpoint tonight. My name is Naomi DeWinter. I serve as the president of Muscatine Community College, and I am standing in for your usual host tonight, Chad Bishop. We have a very special show this evening. It is the final episode before Muscatine goes to its election on November 7th. And we have not one, not two, but four special guests to discuss various challenges and opportunities that face the city of Muscatine. As any complicated issue has more than one perspective, we welcome the differing opinions of my guests this evening, and we will present those opinions to you and allow you as the viewer to make up your own decision. So let me introduce the guests for this evening. We have Tom Spread, who is the 3rd Ward representative for Muscatine City Council. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And Santos Saucedo. He is an at-large representative, also currently serving on the City Council. So Tom and Santos are not up for re-election this year, but they have been serving our community in their capacities. So welcome to both of you. We also have Carl Reichert, who is a retired developer, consultant, and mortgage maker. And Ann Brumback. We just talked before the show. Ann is a graduate of Muscatine Community College. She's a legal researcher and citizen activist. Perhaps you've followed Ann's opinions on Facebook or in other media. And so prior to tonight's show, I asked our guests what topics they feel are important to discuss this evening, and I want to share with you what those are, and if time is friendly to us, we'll be able to get to most of them tonight. So we'll discuss the Port Authority, the CAT grant that was awarded to Muscatine for 4 city improvement projects, other construction projects that are either in the pipeline or have been planned, such as Grandview Avenue, Carver Corner, the wastewater treatment plant, affordable housing. If you followed the news, you know this is one of the big issues for Muscatine, and we'd like to talk with our guests about their efforts to improve affordable housing for our citizens. We'll also discuss the recent conflicts over City Council, City Administrator, and Mayor, and get the opinions of our guests on what is the best way forward. So let's start with those topics. I'd like to roll back to the Port Authority. It's something that I've been reading a lot about in the Journal, particularly. What will it mean for Muscatine? Could someone describe this opportunity and when it might come to fruition?
I'll jump in if you wish. And I hesitate to call it the Port Authority. That is one possibility. I'm going to call it the Port of Muscatine.
Okay.
The Port Authority implies that it's publicly owned land, and today we're talking about privately owned land for a potential destination. So, to date what's happened is the city applied for and received an $80,000 lift grant to support a feasibility study. It was a $100,000 project, and the owner of the property, Kent Corporation, put up the other $20,000 to fund the study. That feasibility study tells us that it is a doable project, that it would be viable and important to the city. It does offer that the proper form of governance would be a port commission, and there you get into the politics or the discussion of what is what is the proper structure for owning and operating that type of a facility. And what a port commission does is allow for a public-private partnership. And it affords the city to have input into the infrastructural requirements that are, and some of the government's issues. But what it does is it takes the risk away from the city and the taxpayer. The private owner is obligated to build and maintain the facility. If you use a port authority, what you're doing is not only one, deeding the land over to a public entity, but then that entity has the capacity to borrow, to put in the structure. So the best case scenario in my view today is that it be a public-private partnership and established as a commission.
So what, before we get into how it might be organized, what would a port of Muscatine bring to Muscatine, and when would be the earliest we might see something like this happen?
Well, the feasibility study has a workflow that extends out to 2020. So that's the best possible timeline we can talk about, I suppose. What we're really talking about is what's called an intermodal port facility, and that allows us to put containers, shipping containers, on barges or take them off of barges and put them on rail or truck, vice versa. There is no such facility in the area. I believe the closest such facilities are St. Louis and St. Paul. So we're pretty well situated to have something like this. There are 8 or 9 companies in Muscatine that would potentially use it. There are as many as 100 in the Quad Cities area that would use it. Today, much of that traffic goes to the Great Lakes. It has to go to Chicago. So it's economic development. It's jobs creation. It's revenues to be derived from the shipping industry. So.
Okay, all right. So did I understand you correctly, Tom? The way you're thinking about how this might go forward is in a public-private partnership.
That is the recommendation in the feasibility study.
All right.
Yes.
Carl, we had a conversation about this topic as well, and share another opinion of how this might be organized.
Well, I look at it, well, first of all, what do I see in the Port Authority? This gives Muscatine an opportunity to grow, and grow unbelievably so. First of all, the Port Authority could be utilized, and probably would be utilized. You stick a needle in Muscatine and do a 250-mile arc. Any manufacturer that has products that are not in danger of spoiling when shipping. You can't produce, you can't ship cabbage to down this way. But anything that has a shelf life that allows you to ship it, this is by far the cheapest way. And what I'm talking about is, and I'm going to pick on a local person. We have a local company that makes the best cat litter in the world. All right, that cat litter can be put into a container. That container can be loaded onto a barge. That barge, along with many other containers, can go down the Mississippi River. It could even possibly be pulled across the Gulf to Tampa, where the entire barge could be loaded onto a ship and exported to Europe. It costs a small fortune, and many people are reeling when they have to go through the Panama Canal. So, this may have some limit, but you can still get through the Panama Canal. The other thing that the Port Authority does is it just offers tremendous opportunity for the city of Muscatine. It can create jobs. It can create many things. We had one person who's an old friend of mine when I was doing consulting from Mexico point out that this offers the potential that there could be a company located just to fabricate barges here. Right there, you're talking certified welders and possibly more pay scale. You're looking at possibly 100 acres of containers. You're talking about a very expensive and very powerful crane to load the barges with. You're talking about people to load those. The other thing that you're doing is the expression used to be called transshipper. Many people that have a manufacturing plant within 250 miles may want to just build a warehouse here so that they can load their containers from the warehouse when they get a shipping order. So and you can carry it on extensively to bulk. One local company just shipped a barge of 430,000 gallons of pure alcohol down the river. That's fantastic, and it could be done, and it is the least expensive way to ship products, by far the least expensive way. So what comes next? How do you get there from here? The Port Authority and the public-private partnership has a lot of positives, but the Port Authority has, and you have to, one of them is, in my opinion, is to take a look at the bonding capacity of the city. All right, because if you do a public-private partnership, I don't think that it is appropriate for the city of Muscatine, who has everything to gain, should be obligating themselves to any type of financial support on something that is privately held, on privately owned land. The Port Authority was set up by the Iowa legislature. It allows a complete separate public entity to be created called the Port Authority. It could be called Muscatine Port Authority. One of the two basic requirements for the Port Authority is that it has to be joint ventured with two political entities, the city of Muscatine being one. It could be Fruitland, West Liberty, any other political entity.
State of Iowa.
Yeah, it could be any of them.
Another political entity, right.
This gives it extremely interesting because this gives a source. If the Port Authority were to borrow money, i.e. in the form of bonds, that liability would not reflect on the city of Muscatine. In my envisionment, the Port Authority would very quickly exceed the bonding capacity of the city of Muscatine. This is the tremendous potential that it has. It could become a regional powerhouse. It could make Muscatine grow again. It could do a lot of things for the benefit of the people of Muscatine, and as well as that. But you got to have two political subdivisions to be able to do it, Muscatine and another one. I don't know today, with all the problems, if you could talk, as an example, Fruitland City Council into going into a joint venture with the city of Muscatine because of all the problems we've had with the mayor and all the other controversies that have been going on. And we're again talking a tremendous amount of money. That would have to be something that would have to be worked out before it could ever go. But it is just a horrendous opportunity.
So I think I'm hearing general and overwhelming support for the idea of the Port of Muscatine and the impact it could have on economic development, trade, and all of the great things that you've mentioned. But there are two different perspectives on how it would be organized. I think, Tom, the way you described it was as a public-private partnership.
Right.
Carl, you're describing a separate public entity, which is the authority. So will the Port Authority happen for sure? And are we just discussing now what is the best way to build it? Or are we still at that, we're not sure this will happen, and we're not sure how the best way that it will happen?
The latter.
Okay.
It's not a done deal by any means.
So we're still waiting for this feasibility study as one key point of,
That's part of it.
Data. Okay.
There is, you're talking not millions, but perhaps many millions of dollars on this.
Initial investment.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can't have a Port Authority unless you got something to lift the container into, and believe me, those type of cranes don't come cheap.
Exactly.
So in the feasibility study, the initial information we were getting back was saying, okay, it's going to probably be $20 million to start building to $50 million, and the approach would probably be in phases depending on how the business would be, coming in. Okay, in a potential would say, okay, we're going to start out with 10 jobs. The containers or companies that would want to be actually bringing products in and shipping.
Right, but yeah, that is a huge decrement to where do I want? Well, put yourself in a different, as an older person, put yourself in the position of, you're a member of a city council of another city, and you're approached by a council that, do I dare call it civil war, that's going on, or at least emotional civil war with everybody, and say, let's be partners in this venture. What would be your reaction? Whoa, wait a minute, do I want to get involved with this at all? That could hurt. That could
It
hurt
could,
drastically.
and you're making some assumptions about where this is going to go that assumes that we're going to pursue a port authority.
Yeah,
May not be the case.
I know.
The recommendation, frankly, is not to use the port authority. That was my point earlier. And, you know, to the extent that there needs to be borrowing for this project, and there will be,
Oh, yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be city borrowings. We have a legal loan limit, and we have a plan to use that loan limit in large part for the sewer separation project, which runs through 2024.
Yeah, yeah. But here again, and why do I support the Port Authority so much? I have to give you an example. Muscatine was approximately the same population that it is today when I was a kid. Now there's been economic upturns and downturns and everything else, and there's no point in getting into why it was. But I think our era is we are now in the buggy whip era. All right, what am I saying? 150 years ago, this man made the best buggy whip in the world. No higher quality buggy whip ever made. And the demand was so bad that he had some 50 people helping him. Sales dropped down to basically nothing, and he found himself working alone again. The newspaper came to him and they said, "What happened? You unquestionably make the best buggy whip in the world, but nobody's buying them anymore." And he said, "Well, I don't understand it either. Ever since they invented this thing called the horseless carriage, nobody's ordering buggy whips." All right, I think we might be in that stage now. And if we are, where a computer builds a car or builds whatever, a widget, and the person gets up in the morning, goes, flips a switch, checks the computer screen to see if it's working, and watches it. If we don't have something that avoids that death of the Industrial Revolution, to use that ambiguous expression, where's Muscatine going to go? Where's the state of Iowa going to go? We're sitting with farmers that have a cup of tea while they're harvesting their cornfield because they got global positioning. If we don't get, no matter what computer builds it, it still has to go someplace to be consumed. So just maybe Muscatine could miss the buggy whip era, just maybe. But that's a question that I think has to be asked before we do it.
Mm-hmm. And as I've been in Muscatine, I've learned the industry is quite diverse. And so your example was one person, one industry, and when that goes away, you know, there's a world of hurt. But I have seen a lot of diversity in our base. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on from the Port of Muscatine discussion to the topic of affordable housing. And I've read up on this in the journal lately, and I understand that there was a housing survey recently completed. And perhaps we can discuss the results, what we know about the results of the survey, and what some steps what steps are being taken to address those survey results. Who's most familiar with this topic at this point? We're looking at you, Tom.
Yeah, you are. Okay. All right.
And it was a housing demand study.
Yes,
Housing
it was a
demand
housing
study.
demand.
Affordable housing.
Right.
It was a housing demand study.
One of the elements of that study was that there is a need for affordable housing. No, that is part of it certainly, and it is important.
Okay.
I want to back up and give you a little bit of a historic perspective. I moved here in 1999 with my family, and one of the first pieces of information I saw when I came to town was a housing study. It was performed by a gentleman named Tracy Cross. That doesn't mean anything to anybody here, I don't think, but Tracy Cross is a housing consultant that's been around quite a while. Prior to moving here, I worked in a $15 billion bank in Illinois. Tracy Cross was a consultant who met with us quarterly to tell us what was going on in the housing industry. So Tracy had done a study for the developers of what is now the Cobblestone Apartments area. And the problem that we had, frankly, with that study was that the developer picked the pieces he liked and ignored the total plan, ignored the result. Well, in the early 2000s, the city of Muscatine and then the Chamber of Commerce got together and funded another housing study, and they brought Tracy Cross back to town. And Tracy does great work. I know him well. And lo and behold, there was a meeting in the city council chambers, or down in the conference room, and realtors, developers, all the players in that market were here, and the very same thing happened. People cherry-picked it and selected the pieces that appealed to them and didn't follow the plan. Now we come again and we engage another firm to do yet another study. It's important that we look at this as a planned document. And that is my insight into the whole thing, is that you can't just look at the pieces that mean the most to you, or you've got to look at it as a way to develop the entire city.
So we don't just need affordable housing. We need single houses. We need
Yes.
senior housing. We need starter homes. We need multifamilies. We need housing. That's just a clear indication.
And as we speak, just a block or two away, there's a 52, 53 unit affordable housing unit going up.
Behind Yaki Shack.
Yes. That in part is funded through IDED with tax credits. And the local match for that comes in the form typically of either tax abatement or TIF. I think we used TIF on that one.
Yeah.
We actually approved more than one of those projects last year, and only one made it through the IDED process. That's the Iowa Department of Economic Development. So this year, there's 2 more projects. They're heading the same direction. One is the project.
Probably only one will get approved through the IDA. We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know yet, but our history is that one of the 2 has a chance of getting
What
approved.
are those going to run in cost for people to be able to rent?
Which ones?
Which ones?
The ones.
The new ones going up behind Yaki Shack.
Well, they're 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. I don't have a definitive answer for that. Keeping in mind that they are targeted rents, and they have to meet the requirements of the tax credit folks. So they don't get a tax credit if they don't comply.
So is it going to be more Section 8, or is it
There
going to be a variety of both?
There were 12 or 13 project-based Section 8 grants as a part of that project.
Okay.
So they went with the project. Most typically, a Section 8 voucher goes with the renter, not the landlord.
Right.
Yeah.
So, not to say there couldn't be more, but
Is it going to be property management company that runs those? Is it going to be an
the developer,
individual?
no, it's the developer that built the building, yes.
Okay.
And so you now have an opportunity. There's one over, I'm trying to think of, over by Oak Park. It'll be a senior housing type project. We've talked about that one.
And I think that one said specifically it was somewhere like $600 a month
Yeah.
for the senior housing, which is very affordable in my opinion for a new home.
And we looked at 3 possible developments recently. The one that's out behind, the Aldi in that area,
Right.
that is not an affordable housing. That is a market rate housing project.
That's right.
So that really doesn't enter into this discussion at all. So the other one is over in the Riverbend area. There's some undeveloped land, and a proposal to build essentially more 12plexes, I believe.
In my opinion, all right, well, let's go back to the very basics. In the year 2000, when they did that feasibility study, they brought up one thing that raised a fair number of eyebrows in Muscatine, because for years, the builders of Muscatine, the city has sponsored, everybody has sponsored housing. Well, this comes down to basically one thing. The cost of a house, I think today it's someplace around $140 a square foot. No matter how much volume a builder can go by, he still has to pay money for that 2x4.
I think
and
you're
that
low.
sheet of
I think you're
plywood.
low, but okay. It's
It
getting
could very well
expensive.
be anymore, because I've been out of it for a while.
Yeah.
What the problem is that back in 2000, they pointed out that the average home was 25% above the BMI, I'm sorry, above the basic housing affordability. In other words, the money that people made, the price of the house was at least 25% more than what they could afford to make or to buy. Now, The only way you're going to get affordable housing is you've got to go back and identify what's affordable. Now, the only way that you're going to see affordable housing is if a agency of some sort, it doesn't necessarily have to be the city, but an agency of some sort subsidizes the housing.
That's where the tax credits come in.
One way or another.
Yeah.
Tax credits may be one avenue. The tax credits present two problems. It still doesn't affect the cost of a 2x4. It does affect the sales price with tax credits of the property, if you're going to own or occupy, may or may not still be feasible. All right, but, all right, you know, you can cut things like you can build houses without basements. You know, Muscatine is a rare community because we put basements under practically everything. You go to Lafayette, Indiana, and you have a hard time finding a basement under a house. That cuts the cost a little bit. One or two things has to occur. Either the people's income of Muscatine has to increase, or the cost of construction has to decrease. Now, whether that cost of construction is finding a cheaper 2x4 or finding somebody to subsidize the cost of construction, it's got to happen or you won't see affordable housing. And that comes the question of what you do. Now, this knowledge is such that they're going to make more money per hour. And therefore, they're going to be able to afford more of a house. So, you know, it would be nice if everything was its own little square box, but it doesn't work that way.
And I think in the context of this conversation, you need to keep in mind, you're talking about new construction.
Yeah.
There is an existing housing stock that will sell for less than $140 a square foot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it's closer to about $85 a square foot
and they'll
today.
be held down, which kills appreciation in the community.
So if you build new housing stock and people can afford to move to that opens up, it allows for turnover in the existing housing market.
Yeah.
Both things are desirable.
Yeah, yeah. And Muscatine could even be able, if they got desirable to the point that many other communities are, where we start attracting, you ready for this, flippers that go into that old existing house, fix it up, and turn around and resell it for profit. That's not a bad thing for a community or economy either.
There's no silver bullet. I think there's a lot of options. I like your points of being able to say how can we help in building or attracting new people to come in here, because we already see that from the study that's telling us a lot of people work here but don't live here. And I've always wanted to see how we can do that, and I've looked into this more and more, thinking there's not just one area that we can just focus on and say that's the quick fix. There's a number of different things of saying what's causing them. Is it the amenities? Is it the restaurants? Is it the housing cost? Is it the building cost? Is it the location of where they're at? So there's a number of different things that this housing study comes back and gives us information and says there's just not one quick fix. Which I agree with what you're saying, Carl. There's so many good things that we would be able to say. I even thought about could I build a basement and say, hey, I'll give you potential discount on trying to get yourself built. I mean, there's things that we want to look at that we hope that we can attract, because when you start looking at those numbers, it's frustrating that we have so many people that work here, and we have such a great industry of companies that are paying well enough to where people are driving 45 minutes. And fuel costs, and you start adding that cost up and say, well, man, that could be used here. So we hope that this is the beginning, that the study gives us the information, and then we can start utilizing it, and not just pick parts of it. Let's really focus on, is this where we're going to look at, is it probably some of the amenities? How are we, attracting the baby boomers, or are we attracting, the millennials? How are we focusing on different groups? Because everyone has a voice that they want to be able to say why they don't live here, and maybe it's the schools. Maybe there's a number of different things, but we can't just say there's one silver bullet and says, hey, this fixes it all, because it's not.
I think amenities is a big issue.
Yeah, sure it is.
And restaurants. I mean,
Yep.
You have your typical, corporate restaurants here. There's 5 or 6 Chinese restaurants here. It's the same thing. There's
Like 7 Mexican restaurants.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
no
7 or 8 I was
real
counting the other day.
there's no real diversity. I know a lot of things that I hear is shopping. For example, there's Walmart.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, whereas people can go to Iowa City or people can go to Davenport, they can spend money and get what they want. And I think if Muscatine can find a way to bring the different diversity shopping and things like that. And I'm not saying corporate, because I'm all for shop local businesses, people that live in the community that own businesses here. I'm the first one to support that 110%. But you have to give people options. And when you talk, for example, like you talk about millennials, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, like, for example, my children, my oldest daughter, and if they want to go for fun activities, they'll drive to Iowa City. There's bars, there's more exciting things there than there is here. So I think that you have to also look at the age and the median age and what those people want as well, to attract more of that, where people will actually come here and.
But that just goes back into where the
things.
study gives us that information that tells us a percentage are here, a percentage are here, here's also this percentage,
Exactly.
the housing, we need affordable housing. It's kind of all across the board. And
Oh,
then
I
there's
agree.
different points that come back to saying, you're not just gonna have one quick fix. So that's what frustrated me, because when I first started looking at it, I thought I was just gonna, have this silver key right here and turn the doorknob and it was gonna open up the door and we're gonna have floods of people moving here. It's not that easy. There's a tremendous amount of different pieces that you gotta look at. And it's a challenge for us to say, okay, where do we focus on and what's our top priority when we start budgeting and focusing on goals for the next year and saying, how are we going to be looking at this? Is this an item that we believe that will be a good return on our investment to bring people back here? Because I am passionate about that. I want people to live here and work here, not just work here, take the funds that they get paid and go spend it in Rock Island, Davenport, Iowa City, Washington, wherever it may be, and not really kind of help our community in that growth, because that goes back to what Carl said, since he was a kid. Well, since I was a kid, it hasn't changed either. So there's not going to be something that we can just say this is a quick fix. We hope that we can focus on the right things, and now that this gives us some information, and back to where Tom had said, don't just cherry pick. Let's focus on the real big picture of it, and then start making that a priority for us to start saying, how are we going to move forward in that aspect?
And I think if you look at that study too, and you look at, for example, age, if you take, like, for example, the 35-year-old married, 2 kids, lives here, works here, up to those that are retired that have lived here their entire lives, and that, and you take, for example, their incomes, are they going to spend more locally than they are out of town? And if that's what's going to build the economy, then maybe that's where it gets started. Compared to someone, for example, who just graduates from high school and has a $3.25 an hour job at, for example, McDonald's or something like that. How much are they going to put into the economy? And I think if you start in a place where you can put money into the economy, those people are going to tell their friends, and they're going to tell their friends, and it's going to fall down the line where you're going to be able to bring those people that are going to spend that money into the community.
Yeah. I think we need to try and bring this discussion back to the issue of what can the city do and what has the city done? Because many of the things we're talking about require private investment. I hear a lot of folks saying we need a grocery store in the South End. Don't disagree. It'd be great to have a grocery store in the South End. The city doesn't build grocery stores. We can create an environment, we can help with incentives, but we need somebody with private capital to come in and make that decision.
Tom, let me point out just a pattern of a thought here. Muscatine is not a typical Iowa town. Now, I'm going to get political here. Muscatine is more socialistic than probably any other community. Number one, we're a socialist community. We have a governmental-owned utility company. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying we're socialist.
It's a public utility, right?
Yeah, it's a publicly owned utility company.
The biggest one in Iowa.
Yeah, we have publicly owned soccer fields. We have publicly owned, of course, parks. We have publicly owned baseball diamonds.
They were all donated funding
Now,
largely
if
part
you're
by
going to be
industry.
a socialist community, then that's fine, but we aren't. Now,
Well, but you do, I think Santos brings up a point. How were those projects funded?
yeah, Yeah,
No,
well,
they
a
were
lot of it was
funded by
donation,
exactly. They were
which
funded
comes
by
back to
great
the-
corporate citizens.
to the point of affordable housing, unless somehow that builder or that buyer, there was an old Section 235 that every conservative hated because a person could buy a house with $200 down and the government would subsidize their monthly payments down to 1%. That went over like crazy in Muscatine.
When was
But
that?
I'm sorry?
When was that?
In the 70s.
Okay.
Back before they invented hair. But the
Really?
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean- the issue here is that it's so complicated that the city council can't do it. Well, they spend too much time fighting, but they can't do it. The Board of Education, Realtor.com, which the statistics when I got out was 78% of the people who buy a home when moving to a community look at Realtor.com before they even call a realtor to see a house. Realtor.com just tears Muscatine apart in its education system as being bad. They rate us against all the other schools, and Muscatine doesn't come out very well. Believe me, a new person coming to Muscatine is going to take a look at that if they got a family. All right. And
Nothing that we can do about it here.
I know there's nothing you guys can do about it,
So
but the community should do something about it.
Correct. I think that would be for a different debate.
But here again, who
That's a
cares what their
school
house
board
sells
issue.
for, right?
Yeah.
Now that, why does education affect the sales price of a house? You better believe it does, just for that reason alone. Who is the largest new home lot landowner in Muscatine as of last year? The answer is the banks, because there's not one developer left that's still around that hasn't given up. You got virtually all the subdivisions inside the city as well as possibly outside the city or close to the city. Hey, they had no choice. The sales weren't there. They priced themselves out of a market. You can use that argument, any other argument you want, but the bottom line is, all right, number two, who's the largest employer in Muscatine? The temp service is. They have more people working for them. Yeah, they go to Allsteel, they go to all the various companies, but they're the largest employer in Muscatine in terms of people who work.
I don't know if that's true.
Well, that's what I was told when we did an initial study.
I would question that source on where that comes from, but
But what is the problem with temps? Is, the problem is the people don't get the full pay. It gets chopped up a little bit. Hey, that's the name of the game today. So, we have to learn to accept it. But is it right? When you go back to affordable housing, one of the things that I think is going to become inevitable is you have to ask yourself the question, is it going to be multifamily, high-density apartments? Because that may be the only thing that the city of Muscatine can afford.
I don't think that's just a Muscatine question.
No, it's not. It's true. But
So let me interject here and wrap up our conversation around the housing demand study. It was presented that several projects are underway or near underway that address some of the needs that were lifted up in the study. Let me move to something that's been covered quite a bit in the news lately for several months, and that is the conflict between City Council, the City Administrator, and Mayor. It seems just last week there was, or maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a judgment issued that presented a bookend to that conflict. What I would like to hear from you is, what is the best way forward for Muscatine from here on out?
I'd like to address that
Go
if I
ahead.
Okay.
can. I think that the fighting and all of the disagreeing really needs to stop. An issue was ordered. Some people are happy, some people are not happy. That's okay. We're all entitled to that. I guess for me, one of the things that I would like to address with both Councilman Spread and Councilman Saucedo is just to kind of think about something. Just, and I don't expect an answer today or anything, but I would really like you to think about something. If the city administrator goes through and files his lawsuit, not only does it go at Diana Broderson as an individual, but as the mayor, but it also goes against the city of Muscatine. And Santos, you made a very good point. You spoke on a local news channel, and one of the things that you had said was, none of us want our names drug into a big ugly lawsuit. And I agree with that. The problem is that the city of Muscatine is an entity. If that lawsuit gets filed, that includes all of you. That includes every city department, every city employee, every city leader, every city council. At which point in the future, if an employer says, have you ever been involved in a lawsuit? For example, Tom, I know with banking, you would have to answer yes. Although you weren't identified as an individual, you were part of the entity.
But I've made a 40-year career out of that.
I understand, but even for other council people, what I'm saying is, as part of the entity, you have to respond yes to that. There is not going to be any companies that are going to want to come to Muscatine and lay roots inside where a government is just bickering and arguing and fighting and that. And for me, I guess I would just say, please understand that if this is supported, it's a horrible thing for Muscatine. It's horrible for all of you personally and professionally. It's horrible for the image of this city. There's not going to be a way for us to grow because people aren't going to want to come here. And the other part of that is we potentially can lose grant money, TIF money, loan money, anything like that, because people aren't going to want to get involved in the consternation. And so for me, as we all know, I'm very outspoken about the entire issue. I also live here. I was actually in the process of moving away, and I stayed, and I take care of my mom, and we live here. We bank at Community Bank. I've had interactions with Tom outside of things, very professional and done very, very well, and it's been wonderful. I just don't want that to continue happening. My grandkids are here. This is where they're going to grow up. And I think that if this is allowed to continue, it's just going to make a black eye for everyone, and we're not going to be able to move forward with things because we're not going to have the monies to do it.
So I want to comment just on what you're saying. So in what the city administrator has filed, he has requested for a letter of an apology and
Correct,
a
I have
redaction
read
letter.
that.
So if you review what he's requesting, is basically saying, send me an apology letter, tell me that these are not, factual.
He asked for an apology and a settlement.
He asked for a retraction.
A retraction.
A retraction. The settlement would come out of the lawsuit. He's asked for a retraction.
He hasn't filed that.
Right, he hasn't filed.
So we don't want to go through that as well.
Right,
and we understand
but if he doesn't get that, and what I'm saying is if he doesn't get that, and he files that,
so who's
that's going to be horrendous.
So where's the ball in whose court?
Yeah.
Well, but
That's
again,
what we're getting at.
How can we stop this?
But we go to he said, she said. And
Didn't have to happen.
well, I agree it didn't have to happen. However, as
It
I
did.
said in January, the city council is the boss of the city administrator. And unfortunately, he ran the show and his pattern has continued.
So he does not run the show.
And again, I don't want to have a debate argument, you're wrong kind of a thing. That's not what I want to do. I just want people to understand that if this continues, I've sat here and listened to both of you talk tonight, and it's been fantastic, the things that you really want to see happen for Muscatine, and trust me, I'm all for progress.
Yeah.
But if something's not stopped in a hurry, and I'm not saying it's the mayor, I'm not saying it's the city administrator, I'm saying it's everybody. If it does not stop.
And the public at large.
Well, and that's fine.
And you have played a role in that.
I have played a role in that, but at the same time, I've backed it up with specific facts.
Okay.
I have not seen any facts.
I'm going to lay out an example. You wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the state of Iowa.
Yes, I did.
In the very first paragraph, you alleged that I had a conflict of interest when I voted on a matter in City Council.
When you what, I'm sorry?
You alleged that I had a conflict of interest, a clear conflict of interest, when I voted on a matter at City Council. It's paragraph 1.
What conflict was that?
It was the vote on whether or not we should have temporarily a program for chickens in the city limits.
Because I also know the people that run that company who do banking with you.
They do not.
Okay.
They never have.
Okay.
So here's the problem. You publicly accused me of a conflict of interest in written form to the Attorney General.
I did. And I had things
And
to
you
back
have
it up.
and you
That
have no
report-
facts.
That report was 190 pages long, full of facts.
You have no facts about my conflict of interest.
I am more than happy
So-
to give you my report with all of
seen
the
it.
facts.
We've
I
seen
haven't.
it. We've seen it.
You know, with all of the facts.
You're missing the,
and there's even
you're
more
missing
facts.
the point.
Okay, then
The point
explain
is
the point.
you fabricated the entire paragraph about me in a letter to the Attorney General. It's wrong.
Okay, well,
It didn't
first of all, I
happen.
didn't fabricate anything, and secondly, I know plenty of facts about you and all of the other council people that I can back up
There is.
those things with.
I do not have.
And
the
if we
bank does
wanna-
not have a personal or business relationship with the hatchery, the senior management, or anyone that owns it. Never have.
Can I say something on that?
No, you can't, because I'm asking right now for accountability. I'm asking for the same thing Greg Mansanger did. I would like a retraction right now
I'm not
because
going to
you were
retract.
wrong.
I'm not going to retract anything that I have facts of and paper to prove it. I'm not going to retract that.
There is no such thing.
Okay.
I think, all right, I sat on the city council when we created the position of the city administrator, again, back before they invented hair. We spent over a year and a half discussing the issue. Why did we decide, how did the issue get started? Because at that point in time, whenever a question came before the city council, there was a motion, I moved that it be moved to the city engineer for study. Now that was the council's way of sidestepping the issue. All right, it wasn't working because the city engineer had about 10 years backlog and things for study. Many of which created problems, like buying a new piece of equipment or whatever. So we went into a discussion. The discussion lasted many a time. The press was invited. The press didn't show up, but they were invited. We had them soup and sandwich at the Hotel Muscatine. That's how long ago it was. Won't go there, but the function of the city administrator, and if you want to be really technical, he is the city clerk. And accepting the phrase city administrator, and we created that position. There was many discussions on the city administrator versus city manager. There were many discussions on the type of infrastructure that could be set up. Gordon Yeager was the first city administrator to be hired. We told Gordon that what we want, at that point in time, the city of Muscatine had in excess of 100 different checking accounts. And those checking accounts, many of which were overdrawn at an unbelievable amount of interest per day the banks were charging to cover an overdrawn check.
Okay, Carl, I need to cut you off just in the spirit of time because there are a couple more things I want to allow you time for. Let me remind you of my original question, which was, what is the best way forward for Muscatine? And what I heard was some agreement that another lawsuit is not in the best interest of this community, and it is something that all parties wish to avoid. What I also heard is we all have a responsibility in this matter. If we care for Muscatine and for the growth of Muscatine, we're responsible citizens. We need to be engaged in the process. We need to speak honestly. We need to research all of the issues from all the various perspectives. We need to use trusted sources for information. And so I think, Tom, you said we all have a role in
We do.
this.
And we need a return to civility.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And so I want to close this evening session reminding our residents that Tuesday, November 7th is a great day for us, and please exercise your ability to vote. And I want to ask our guests for any last minute observations you would like to make tonight. Santos?
So I want to just echo a lot of what you're saying, Naomi. I want to encourage the residents to vote. I want them to make sure that you remind the citizens that we pay attention to people's actions, not their words, and we will be judging them by those actions. And so I hope that November 7th you vote for Charlie Harper and Scott Natvig as we continue to move forward in what we're doing.
Similar to what Santos said, this is an important election, and I look back at the election 2 years ago, and the turnout was so poor. It's important that people get engaged and go out and vote their conscience. It really is, and maybe all of these things can be avoided by doing so.
Ann?
I, again, am absolutely supportive of everybody getting out and voting. It's absolutely important to have your voice heard. I would personally say that if you're going to vote, yes, vote your conscience, but also vote what you believe is right for you and your future. And I believe the only way to do that is to bring in new council members and have a fresh start. I think it's out with the old and in with the new.
Carl?
I think there has to be new. I have many questions that, with this fiasco at City Hall, that remains unanswered, and myself personally. I feel that the mayor, the existing mayor, needs to be reelected, and I like Charlie and everything else, but the existing mayor needs to be reelected because she had some wonderful plans that she wanted to hope to get through, and she has been pigeonholed for 2 years. So I would say that it would help if the mayor got reelected. If the existing, and I'm going to use this word ambiguously, surviving council members after the election would try working with her, and if that means sitting down for 25 years and talking to her, that's fine. But I think that there's going to have to be a change of the city's internal organization infrastructure, or it will not go away.
I want to thank you for joining us this evening, and please exercise your right to vote November 7th. If you care about Muscatine, you care about the future and the growth of Muscatine, we will see you at the polls. I want to thank our guests for joining us this evening. Thank you for your passionate speeches about topics that you care about, and thank you for your service to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I hear the voice of the preacher from the back room, calling my name and I follow just to find you. I trace the faith to a broken down television and put on the weather. Then I've trained myself to give up on the past, cause I've frozen time between hearses and caskets. Lost control when I panicked at the acid test. I wanna get better.